Hey, buddy.
Hey, how's it going, man? Good
So
to
good. I
see
know.
you.
Yeah, totally. It's been a while, hasn't it?
I'm trying to remember the last time. I don't
I,
know.
I was thinking about it just before we got on, and I feel like the half life of these gaps is getting close. Is like coming closer and closer. It was like 10 years the first time we, like, from the time of Britfest to when we connected again. It was like 10 years. Now it's not that long now. It's like maybe two, maybe three, but it's been a while.
It has, and I was thinking about the same thing, and so congratulations on the new show, by the way.
Oh,
That's
thanks,
very
man.
cool, and I just
Yeah.
love it. And I was thinking, Brit, I believe that was 20 years ago at this point, right?
Oh my God, you're right.
Wasn't that '01 or
I
'02 or
it
something like
was
that?
I think it was 01. Yeah. That's nuts. That's crazy.
Yeah, a few things have changed in the last 20 years.
Let's hope. Holy wow.
Yeah,
That's wild to think about.
I have some good memories of we were hanging out having some barbecue on Divisadero.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Did that, and
Yeah.
we have to have run into each other since then. But if so, not too many times. You're still living in Santa Cruz, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm on the East Coast right now, but I'm still in Santa Cruz. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. On the East Coast right now. Wow.
Yeah.
What? Okay. So November 1st. Is it chilly or is it?
It's definitely like crisp fall weather.
Okay.
I've been here for about 3 weeks, and right now you can see the leaves are definitely like yellow, it's starting to turn red, all those things. So it's just really incredible here, the nature and all the things it's offering right now. When I got here, it was still a little warm. It was still like 70 degrees, and like, oh, I packed way too much warm stuff, but turns out not so much right now. But I'll be back next week or this week actually. Come back
Okay.
Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're just missing a bunch of rain today.
I know.
So that's okay.
Yeah. We need it though. It's good. It's good to hear.
Yeah. Were you? Oh, so you weren't here for that Stormageddon that we had
No.
come through and blow everything. So I went out. I've been trying to one of my daily practices. I've been trying to do. We've talked a lot about this. We probably the last time you were on the podcast was like 600 episodes ago or something like that.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
We got to do it more recently than that, but we definitely talked a lot about all sorts of things. But I've been trying to take my GoPro with me every day and just sort of document my day and have sort of just like a video journal of sorts. And I find when I bring the camera, I look at the world just a little bit differently. And so I went out and I thought, I'm going to do this. Doesn't matter if it rains, the GoPro's waterproof. So I went out on this stormy, I guess we've started the podcast. We can edit out anything you like, Allan, but this is how I do it these days. I just let
No,
it
that's
rip.
great. Yeah.
I will fill in, folks, on what I'm talking about. We got hit with this atmospheric. It was called a bomb cyclone, which sounds horrifying, but it was just like a whole. Like the worst that happens here is rain or rain and wind, but it was definitely the most rain and wind I've seen since moving here. So but I said the rain's not going to stop me. I'm going to go out. I'm going to go out with my GoPro and I'm filming, and I start to get up around Fort Mason, which is this high point for people that are living on the waterfront. And I realize I have made a mistake because it is very windy. And I look up and I see all these eucalyptus trees swaying, and I see that branches have fallen. And I realize I am going to die. This is how Jason dies. Branch falls on me, and and so you could. I have all these clips I was filming, and I'm getting increasingly more worried. I'm like, haha, the rain won't stop me. And then I'm like, well, it's raining. And then I said, I am heading home. And that's the first time. I never thought rain would bother me. Moving here, I thought, how silly,
Yeah.
in a cold place with winter and everything like that. But I was defeated.
Oh my goodness. Well, thankfully you're still here. Thankfully, like, you didn't end up being the dead body that someone else finds in the park.
That's right. I told you about that. Among
Yeah.
again, filling in, folks, things I haven't really talked about on the podcast, but I'm happy to. My wife and I, when we were just in the process of moving here, ran into a dead body in Golden Gate Park, just walking along Sunday morning, and yeah, that happened. So I should try to parlay that into a YouTube video at some point.
Oh yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's quite a story. I mean, like, wow. Yeah.
Well, one thing that did happen that speaking of YouTube videos, that I did parlay into a YouTube video, since I've seen you last, I have filmed a series of bass courses, one of which was seized by the FBI.
I saw that. Okay. I saw that one. Yeah. So, like,
so that was like,
it's quite a hook when you like, my course was seized by the FBI. I'm like, I have to click on this and see what happened. Well, it's a crazy story.
Well, it was one of those stories that I thought I really want to make a piece of content called "Something Was Seized by the FBI," but I didn't want to embarrass anybody involved in the project.
Right. Yeah.
But I figured it's been long enough and whatever, and so
yeah.
that's how that goes. But.
Yeah, everyone should go check that out because it's wild.
Well, everybody should go check out Touching Greatness, which is
thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're doing a podcast. And I hit up so many people who are starting a podcast, and I almost never get a chance to talk to somebody who's also a bass player, in their background, who's starting a podcast. So congratulations. And how long have you been thinking about starting a podcast?
Oh man, I think it's been I don't know. It's been one of those things that's been in the back of my mind for, I would say, at least 5 years. Mm-hmm. But I never really it's a funny thing. I'd never really thought of it. It's always on those, that'd be cool. I could see myself doing that someday, maybe. Mm-hmm. And one morning I woke up and I was just free writing. And I was using I think it's David Byrne's, what's it called? He has these prompts. I can't remember what the name of it is. Oblique Strategies. Mm-hmm. He has this box of cards and they all have prompts and they're meant to stimulate problem solving. And they're just cool prompts to free write on, journal on. They just get your thinking in different ways. And I picked up this card and the card was something like, what's a sudden unexpected action you could take today? And as soon as I saw the card, just like that, the word podcast came to my mind. I was like, whoa, that's weird. And I was like, I sat with a little bit and there was something there that I didn't want to just let go and be like, well, I could do it. And that's kind of an interesting answer to that question. So I just kept sitting with it. I was like, okay, I'm going to take some, I'm going to just decide to do it. So that afternoon I went to Facebook and I wrote a coming soon announcement. It's like, I found a picture of a coming soon sign and put it on Facebook and said, hey, I've got a podcast coming. So all of a sudden it became this very real thing. And I was surprised, actually. All these people wrote me direct messages and were like, oh, I can't wait. This is awesome. I've been waiting for you to do something like this. And I was like, oh no.
You're in it now.
Yeah. So over the next, I thought it would be really easy, actually. I was like, okay, I'll just do it. And as I sat, I was like, what do I want it to be? And I reached out to a bunch of friends and I asked, I was like, if I had a podcast, what would you think it would be called? And what would you think, what would you really love for me to talk about? And I kept getting these responses back from people that were like, in that moment of time, it was super unhelpful to me. They were basically like saying, I don't know, but I'm just going to listen to it. And I've been wanting this, so just put it out. So that, in a way, it was like, oh, that's great feedback. And why can't you just tell me what the thing is? But then I realized I was like, oh, wow, I'm externalizing this thing that's trying to come from me. And I got a lot more intentional about sitting down in the morning, taking notes, just trying to journal about what I wanted it to be. And it was a long time. It took about 6 to 8 weeks of every morning, half an hour of just getting pen to paper and writing. Even like, there was one point I was like, what am I doing? I don't even remember why I'm doing this. And then finally, there was even points where I thought I might be overthinking it and just like, why don't you just put something out there? Finally, I got to a point where it's like, oh, I think I've captured what I want this to be. And I really wanted to set a foundation so I understood the conversations I want to have and that there was some sort of, it could be loose, but I wanted there to be some sort of lens to be looking through, where the audience could also understand what was involved in spending their time and their attention in listening to this thing. So I finally got to a place where it's like, okay, got it. And then the next evening, I just recorded a welcome episode, just basically detailing the past 8 weeks of what I've been thinking about. And that's what I've released so far. Currently in process of just like recording it. There's been some technical stuff going on that it's like, oh, okay, this isn't as easy as hit record. And so there's a little bit of that, a little bit of like scheduling. Oh, other people have schedules too. It's not just like, so, in my mind, it should all be working very smoothly. But in reality, as I try this my first time, it's like, oh, okay, there's a little bit of a learning curve here.
Yeah, well, podcasting, like so many things in life, podcasting, there's nothing hard about podcasting except it's a lot of little steps. And if we're just talking about the technical things I've learned in 850 episodes of podcasting, like and you are someone that again, like those other people that message you on Facebook, you are somebody that I was hoping would put out something like that, because I just think you're a great person. You're so eloquent, and it's something that I would listen to and have listened to episode 1. And so I was curious, like, are these going to be solo shows? You're going to chat with people? What's your thought in terms of that? I love the solo show. To me, that's the hardest thing by far. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like it was a great relief to have that just welcome episode. Just, this is what this is. I felt like that was really hard to get to, and it really felt like a relief. And everything after that, I think, will be quite easy because there's a foundation now. Mm-hmm. But the way I see it now is 2 different longer format interviews with. I'm going to start with just people I know. I've been just surrounded by extraordinary people doing really ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And there's just so much to highlight there. I mean, you included. I'd love to have you at some point just talking about community.
Anytime.
Yeah. So I think there's just a wealth of people to talk to, and a wealth of insights in just the people that I'm already connected with. So I'm going to start there and have a short list of people that I'm trying to organize right now. And along with that, in the meantime, as that's being organized and those longer episodes, in between those, I also want to have something of a shorter episode where it's just offering one very succinct, very small insight or way you could see the world that you could take into the world and try on for yourself, see if it works, see if it doesn't. So it's a combination of like longer format with someone and very short, very compact, very distilled solo.
That's a great way to do it. It's that kind of reminds me of a podcast I've listened to for years, The Daily Stoic, and I get their email newsletter. But Ryan Holiday does these short 2 to 3 minute, just a little bit, and then on the weekend he does these longer conversations. And I love them both. I find it fascinating how people approach podcasts, and it's funny because it is such a flexible format. It can be a couple minutes, it can be 3 hours, it can be anything in between. It can be with, I most of what I listen to is I guess I'd call it interviews, although they don't even think of what we're doing here as an interview necessarily. We're just hanging out and talking. And then the way I experience podcasts, I'm usually wearing headphones and walking around doing something else. I'm just kind of in the room with them, just sort of learning, just kind of on the journey.
Just being a fly on the wall. Those are the kind of podcasts I love, where it's not so structured in the way of like, well, this person's done this thing and I'm going to just ask them all the questions about this thing. But when there's like a moment where it's more of a conversation between the two people, I love that more than anything.
Well, it's one of those, I feel like doing a podcast is one of those good, the way it works in my life, at least, is it's like a good habit. It's something that it's kind of like working out or brushing my teeth or any of the, I think that it causes me to, it's like a self-improvement project. Like I I'd want to talk to you anyway, because I think you're awesome, and I've just enjoyed hanging out with you over the 20 years, I guess it's been.
Yeah.
But having a podcast, it gets time on the calendar, and it gets time where the phone is away, and you're just chatting about stuff, and then I look into things that I might not otherwise. Like I'm talking to I've talked to Mark Johnson, the great jazz bass player, and I've liked Mark ever since I was a teenager. But because I knew I was coming up and talking with him, I listened to some more of his albums. I probably wouldn't have done that. And it's kind of a neat way to just sort of take my focus and just move it to something and sit with that for a little while. And I just find it to be a good habit. The only downside is time and all those like tiny death by a thousand cuts little stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Actually getting it out there.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. There's something you were talking about, just bring your GoPro around with you everywhere. Mm-hmm. And the thing I've noticed, it's been interesting, and just hitting release of the first one, all of a sudden I have the ears of a podcaster. It's like I'm listening in conversations in a different way. I'm, reaching out to friends in a different way, just like listening for the like little bits of tidbits that might be interesting, and like, oh, that's an interesting thing. What would be a follow-up question if I asked them? So I think that's been really kind of a cool thing it's a cool way to go through the world with those kinds of ears on and that kind of interest and curiosity. And I think you're right too about, it's interesting because there's something about hitting record and creating an intentional space to have a conversation. It's not that much different than really, like we have moments with friends and stuff that are really insightful moments, but there's something about creating a space and hitting record that raises the level of the conversation in some way. And I think that's a real gift to be part of, and a real gift to share with the world. There's just so much there's so much in an intentional conversation, in what can be contained in a podcast in the way of education and what you can gain from it. It really is. It can be a life-changing thing. And
it can. No, absolutely. It's interesting. Yeah. You're making me think about something that I notice, or my wife and I notice a lot walking around. You look at some people and they're just sitting, even though they're together, they're both on their phones, they're not interacting at all. And then you look and you can tell people are having an interesting animated conversation. That's one of the things I love about North Beach, where I live. It feels like old San Francisco a little bit. And like lots of, I don't see so many people on their phones. It's more like people like having fun and causing chaos and chatting and I think the fact that you hit the record button, you kind of show up in a slightly different way. Like we really would be having probably this same exact conversation if the record button was off. But there's something about it that this is not exactly the same, but it's almost like when you're practicing and you turn your recorder on, all of a sudden you just start playing a little bit differently when that red light is there, Yeah.
Some of the extraneous stuff just sort of sloughs away. Yeah.
So are you, okay, so I don't know if you've thought through all these, your vision for this. Do you think it's going to be exclusively remote, or like what we're doing over Zoom, or are you going to try to do some in-person conversations? I know we're hopefully on the tail end of this pandemic, but you and I, when we chatted before, we were at my place up on Mount Sutro. Have you thought ahead about how this is going to integrate into your life?
I haven't thought that far ahead. Right now, I have this, I wouldn't really call it a goal, but I remember a great friend of mine, Damon Coleman, who's an incredible cellist, and he gives a recital every single year. And not just like, I'm going to like dust off some repertoire that I played. He really challenges himself to pick repertoire that is just brutal. Like he's got to spend the year actually in it. And he gives these recitals that are, I just find him an incredibly resilient, dedicated, always pushing himself. So, and he's just he's like a musician's musician. One of those people you're like, wow, you hear him play Bach and it's just gorgeous. But one day we were talking, I was asking him about, these recitals, because he gives so many of them. And he mentioned to me that he was at a master class with, I believe it might have been the Juilliard Quartet or something like that. It's at a master class, and they were mentioning whenever we take on new repertoire, we give it it was like some ridiculous amount of performances, like 50 performances. They're like, we do 50 performances before we come back as a group and try to distinguish what's going right or what's going wrong. And I was like, wow. So I'm not going to do 50 episodes before, but I want to give myself about 10 before I really 10 just to do what I'm doing, understand the process a little bit more, understand where I want to be led, where it's guiding me. It's going to have some life of its own at that point, I hope. And see what's working, see what's not, see what I love doing, see what I don't so much, and let that guide me. So I haven't thought beyond that too much. It's just like sort of like, let's give myself a little bit of an easy bite, and let's reflect after that.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And like 10 or something like that seems like a good number. You're taking me back to the dark ages of podcasting when I started. I started planning in 2006. I knew I wanted to do it. So my first one was also a solo show, and I thought I was going to do some sort of NPR style, somber, like with music, artsy sort of thing with music interwoven and telling stories, kind of like some sort of Ira Glass or what's the one Radio Lab or something, just a little more esoteric. Of course, I didn't go that direction at all. And then I realized this is really hard doing by myself. I should really talk to people, but I didn't know anybody. So the second episode is me just like looking at the gear and talking about what I'm recording on. I was like,
oh my gosh,
I'm recording on the whatever ancient technology. And then the third one was like talking about upcoming bass auditions, which there's evergreen content for you.
Right, totally. Yeah.
And then episode 4, I finally started doing interview podcasts. I went over to my friend Andy Anderson in Chicago and talked to him, and it's just hilarious to look back at. And now again, this will probably be 850 something when this comes out. It's really interesting how content. Yeah, it's interesting how you evolve when you do something like this. And I've noticed that in other people's podcasts too. Like when I've talked to people who've been podcasting for a little while and we reach out, I have this little practice I do. I listen to their latest episode, then I go and I listen to the first episode. And it's so interesting to hear how people change the way they do things. I mean, your first episode's great. I enjoy it. It's really interesting. And this talking about, what did you learn from your father, right?
Yeah.
And then it'll just be, I look forward to hearing what episode 10 and beyond.
That's so interesting. It's like you put out the best you can, right? In the moment that you put it out, and then you learn as you go. And I bet that's such a fascinating thing to look back after whatever, 20 episodes, 50 episodes, a year, 2 years of doing this, and go back to the first episode. It must be kind of painful in a way, but also like gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing about putting something out in public that lasts, because I think we're working on things all the time. I don't notice the progress in my own life in so many things. Like bass playing is a good example. I've been practicing so much more consistently since 2018. I had a bit of a stretch where I was like maintenance only mode with bass. And then I finally decided, what are we doing here? Are we going to are we going to take this seriously or not? And I still don't practice a ton, but I get in, at least a half hour every single day, unless I'm out of town or something. And sometimes more, depending on what I got going on. And I just, every once in a while, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm doing this so much better, but I don't realize that I'm better Sunday than I was Saturday, And so that's the neat thing about, and I've noticed that in my video journey the last couple of years, I didn't even know how to focus. And I look like a ghost and my storytelling is real lame. And it's just fun. There's something fun about working on a skill that also goes out into the world like that, just from a self-improvement perspective, I think.
Yeah. So that's it. That's interesting. It like makes me curious about. I mean, like you're deep in the game, right? You've been doing this for decades now. 850. That's like almost 1,000 episodes. Just in the same way of like, okay, what are we doing here? Let's start practicing. I'm really curious about what are the edges that what are the things you feel like you need to be polishing up in your own podcasting, be it the technical side or just relating with your interviewees, any of it. Just really curious about that.
Yeah, well, the challenge is like I'm sort of never happy with anything I do ever, which is probably a good. I mean, hopefully I'm not unnecessarily hard on myself, but I'm always like looking for the next. The thing that I've been thinking the most about. There are many directions I could go with this. Settle down, Jason. Okay. Okay, I'll talk about what. So I'm realizing that I want to capture video when possible. And I have resisted doing that for a long time. Part of it is because I started doing audio only, started in an age where you could only upload a 10-minute clip to YouTube. Like you wouldn't even think of doing and those worlds have merged. And I've noticed in my own habits, I find myself going down long. I thought like no one's ever going to want to listen to one of these things on YouTube. And so for 500 episodes, I just had my podcast client auto publish like a still image to YouTube, which like obviously gets no views because why would you do that?
Yeah.
And then, but I've been thinking, and then now all of a sudden everybody knows how to use Zoom. So all remote podcasts, I get, in general, some passable video. So I've been playing around with putting that out on video. I've also been thinking, I've been thinking about ways to multi-purpose this content, and so video is the thing I've been playing around with because I do notice, I like seeing people chat that I know. And though as a consumer of podcasts, if you want to use that term, I do soak it all in on audio. I find myself going down rabbit holes late at night and watching video. And so that's what I've been thinking about. And then I'll shut up in 1 second, but related lessons learned trying things that worked or didn't work in podcasting. One that's sort of interesting, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is I realized I have now had enough bass famous people. Like no one in the bass world's that famous really, except maybe Esperanza Spalding. But I've had enough people to give.
Have you talked to her?
No, I haven't. Okay. And this is actually related to what I'm slowly getting towards. I've realized that once you have enough people that are quote unquote famous, you kind of have street cred. And actually, I am not particularly interested in the level of public prominence that people I'm talking to have. Yeah. And that might seem slightly weird, but here's what I've discovered, and I'm not the only one. Like if I talk to Christian McBride, and I have talked to Christian McBride for the podcast, well, if someone wants to hear Christian McBride, he's got his own NPR show. I think he's been interviewed by countless people. Like that he is on my podcast does not, like, it's cool for me to talk to him, and that does perform a bit better. But what really interests me are finding those, and Lauren Pierce, the wonderful bassist, she hit me to this. She said, your podcast is turning into Humans of New York. Now, Allan, do you follow Humans of New York, or are you familiar?
I'm familiar with it. I don't necessarily follow it, but it's been years since I've even,
I don't even know if they're doing it anymore, but real quick, for people listening that don't know what that is, it's kind of like taking everyday people and just like having them tell their story, finding something interesting. And so I've really had a good time just finding interesting stories. And so that's I'll shut up now, but that's one thing that's been of particular interest to me.
Yeah, I love that. It's the way I'm orienting to my own podcast as well, and why I'm starting with sort of my and I don't know if I'd call it an inner circle, but just people I'm more directly connected with. I just think there's so much wealth there already, and I'm really focused also on. It's like that's one of the problems of starting a podcast, in my mind at least, for me, is, there is just so much noise in the world too. Do I really want to be another person who's just contributing to the noise? So for me, I just always want to be oriented to quality rather than quantity. And that's another reason why it's like, well, yeah, I'm going to start with people who I find interesting. They don't have to be big names. There's a story in them, and there's a story in anyone if we take the time to get present to them, really listen, ask great questions, and discover. And I love that you're seeing that too.
Yeah, my experience of the podcast is this, what we're doing right now, and we'll get done chatting, and I'll think that was a great way to spend some time. I'm so happy I did that, and so it's kind of a scratching my own itch kind of thing. And I think the approach of start with people you know, and then it's just like dropping a pebble in the pond, right? It's like it naturally leads. I have no plan or agenda with my podcast or program. It's totally random who I talk to and when. I was surfing Facebook late one night, which I actually try to avoid doing, but I go down that and I saw that pop up from you, and I'm like, boom, we got to talk. And so now we're talking. And then I've been speaking of someone who has really cool like annual practice of putting content out there, like a recital. Steve Tramontosi, he just put out a new album, and then one that is coming soon. And so he's coming out. We were playing San Francisco Symphony last week, and he said, hey, let's do I talked to him a couple of years ago for the podcast. So he's going to come over here. We're going to talk about the process behind putting those albums together. I mean, Steve's a known figure. It's not like he's I'm like walking up to someone random on the street, but I just love, it's just like, there's like an organic quality to how things come onto my plate or come onto the calendar. I try. I have a list. People suggest people. I put them on a list, and sometimes I'll like go look through that list, and they're generally good suggestions, but it just might not be the right time for that person. I have quit trying to bother Edgar Meyer for an interview, but you know what? Someday, if that's the time to talk with Edgar Meyer, it'll happen. And I don't really. It's not going to help. If I think of it like strategically, it's not going to like do anything except it's cool to talk to Edgar Meyer. So when it's, I'm not going to pester anybody. Just when things align, it's the right time, and things happen. That's
interesting. I'm really curious. Was that more of an internal shift, or was that an external shift? And by that, do I mean, was there a moment you just decided, hey, I'm just going to stop? I don't like pushing is not the right word. That's my own word. But I'm going to stop pushing for guests and everything. And I'm going to just keep my eyes open for these opportunities that come around me. Or was it just you got to a point where you had put out so much content and you became sort of like you said, you had some street cred, and it was that shifted it, or maybe it's a combination of both. I don't know.
It's really interesting, and I love talking about this, Allan, because this all has changed a lot since we sat down on that couch at my old place at Mount Sutro to do that podcast. It happened in early 2017, and what happened was I was okay. So I remember talking with you. I was in my apartment in Chicago. We'd reconnected through, I think, the Bass Bash here in San Francisco or something, and I was still teaching high school at that time.
Right.
I thought, I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to pretend this podcast is my job, and we'll just see what happens. I'm not going to try to be in the Freeway Philharmonic and play a ton of gigs. I'm not going to try to teach 20,000 students. Now I ended up kind of doing a little bit of all of that, because I was really like, Jason's got to make some money.
Yeah, it'd be nice to eat this month.
It's rough over here, and so. But I was putting this intense pressure on myself to turn this stuff that I was doing into a business, and I was putting too much pressure on myself. I realize now these are easy things to look in the rearview mirror on. But what happened was I stopped pushing. And part of it is things just you show up every day, and you treat something like a job, and opportunities do materialize, and they did start to actually materialize. I started to develop this weird portfolio career I have now, and I was doing consulting opportunities were coming, things that, and advertising was coming from the podcast, but like all that happened when I quit trying to I was trying to have everybody, like I was trying to make courses for people to buy, and I was trying to like monetize monetize my audience as intensely as I could, and I just settled down with all of that. And I also got busy enough that I didn't have time to like obsess over the podcast and like check the numbers 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And I think I have not gone, I just haven't had the time or the inclination to do this, but I would be fascinated to go and listen to like 20 episodes at random from 2017, because that's when I stopped worrying and looking at my dwindling bank account so much. And it's just, isn't it funny how in life, when you quit pushing so hard, that's when things start to come in. Like the good stuff, I guess I'll call it, really started to come when I stopped trying to like, put pedal to the metal.
Yeah, it is a funny tension point. And it's just like one of those things we somehow don't really, it takes multiple iterations of that before we're like, oh, wow, I did it again. I got all worked up over nothing.
Yeah.
That's cool. I wondered about that because the other day I was doing the same thing, scrolling through Facebook, came across one of your posts, and it was on, I think you were talking about pivot technique.
Mm-hmm.
And I read through the comments, and there was Hal just saying, it's an important thing for the modern bass player, and it's largely misunderstood. We should talk about this sometime, Jason. You were just like, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't we? So I love that. I love how that stuff gets created.
Yeah, well, I love you bring up Hal. So there is something I was like fixated on getting Hal on my podcast. Back in 2015, 2016, I thought like I need to talk to Hal. He's just such an amazing teacher. And he's just got a ton of projects, and we had corresponded. He's like, oh yeah, let's do that sometime. And it's funny, when I quit trying to push, I've now had Hal in my videos. He's been on the podcast. I've gotten to know him personally, and trying, and this is a very specific example, but trying to but it's just funny how things that just like pushing. I don't know if you told me this story or if we've talked about this, but Derek Sivers, who's done many things, but he he's the founder of CD Baby.
CD Baby, yeah.
Did he ever, or have we talked about this story of when he was on the boardwalk in San Diego, or whatever they call that in San Diego, and he would like ride his bike, and he was like just running, and it took him like 25 minutes to go from point A to point B. And one day he was like, you know what? I'm just going to stop pushing so hard. I'm just going to ride at a leisurely pace and just enjoy the sights. And he was looking around, and he was like taking in the clouds and taking in the scenery and whatever. And so gunning to the max, it was taking him 25 minutes. He looked at the watch when he got done, and it was like 28 minutes. So it was like barely a difference. So it's funny how like pushing to your utmost versus like actually enjoying the journey, the results could be so similar.
Yeah. I love that story. I don't know if we've ever talked about it. I know the story though. And I always find it really illuminating. It's like just the amount of, I don't know where it comes from, but the amount of pressure we put on ourselves sometimes to really create things. Whereas, I don't know, I recently took up CrossFit, which is a really freaking challenging thing. There's just, in the beginning, there's so many skills to learn. It's just nuts, and you just never feel like you're doing very well. It's like, and there are people in there who've been doing it forever, so they're like lifting 1 billion pounds over and over again. And it's just interesting how having an orientation towards like not speed, but smooth. How smooth can I be in this thing? And I've learned, for me, it's really helped me dial in my technique at CrossFit. So number one, it's just like I'm keeping myself safe, but just in trying to make things smooth instead of fast, it's just been awesome because it gets in my body in a way that I can remember it. And now that I'm thinking of it, it's like also, I guess, how I approached a lot of my practicing when I was playing bass too. Just how smooth can I make this, rather than how can I push the metronome on Hofner to 152, and just let's start there and just try to like cream it. Let's just try and mash it into my body somehow.
it's so interesting to look back like decades ago, I think like if we think back to 20 years ago when we first met, like the way that I was practicing music or anything, we'll just take music, and the way that I look at things now, and I it's interesting. I was so concerned with getting, actually, as I'm talking through this, I realized there are a lot of parallels between my 2017 journey, that I was so concerned with getting a job, at all costs, and there were these technical roadblocks that I just could not solve. And now, am I the world's greatest bass player now? No, but I have solved some of those things by not gunning to the mat, like, oh, I got to take every audition coming up here. I've got to if I'm not practicing 6 hours a day at all costs, I'm not gonna. And it's just funny how. And then I look around and I just realize we're all just a bunch of humans here. We're all just kind of solving things. So much of this is just happening up here in the noggin anyway. And it's got to be really interesting for folks that work with you, because like you have gotten to a high level at multiple things that are like really, there's kind of like an objective barometer. This might be a terrible way to say it, but like where you got to in music, playing professional bass, your like yoga competition. And I love in your first episode, you like, I know that seems like a contradiction, yoga and competition.
Yeah.
I'll dig up that clip. I've got it in there for our first episode of.
Oh, you can find it on YouTube. It's not hard.
So it's just like how interesting, and then in your current work, just how interesting what you're bringing to the table, like the achieving a high level at something physical, and then also achieving, and music is physical too, obviously, but also achieving a high level at something that's got, probably an even narrower percentage of the population that's gotten mastery like that. It's interesting.
Yeah. For a long time, I just wondered, like, what is this all about? Why is, this is kind of what the podcast is about. For a long time, I loved music, and it just got to a point where it sort of checked off the boxes of what I wanted to do. And of course, there was always a better job, like I still haven't played with Philly or New York or the Met or whatever. There was always that job, that sort of, the Holy Grail. And when I started to look at it really closely, I was like, what really is that going to give me in terms of like happiness or well-being? And it wasn't much. Like, I'm sure I would have loved the musical experiences. So I just really began to look at other things, fell into yoga, did that for a while concurrently with playing music, which was really a fun exploration. And then over time, just also realized it's like, oh, there's something else I want to do here. And when I look at it, there was always the seed of what I do in my work now. It was always, I was always doing it for myself, just trying to get to know myself better. In fact, I think largely there's all kinds of reasons to get into music. It's fun. It's incredible to play music with people. So there's like all these things. But I think at the very bottom of it was like, how good can I get at this thing that is limitless? Like you can be Yo-Yo Ma and still be striving for greatness. You can be Hilary Hahn. You could be whoever is at the top of the field, the 1% of the 1%, and still they're practicing every day. Still, they're looking for a repertoire that challenges them. Still, they're looking outside of the domain to improve their knowledge and philosophy and their way of life to bring back into their art. It's just been a fascinating journey in that way, and I'm realizing I'm a little lost in making my way back to what the question was.
I don't think there was a question.
Okay, cool.
Just riffing.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, it all relates because I'm at the center of it. I mean, that's very obvious. But for me, it's not so much about the external thing anymore. It's like, for me, it's more about who we are and the effort we put in and how we express ourselves through whatever art we choose, whether it's music, whether it's selling cars. For someone, that could be completely aligned with who they are, and they and they're looking at, how can I get better at this? How can I serve my clients more? And so I think that was that shift in my identity doesn't need to be wrapped up in the external thing I do. I can always be expressing myself through anything I'm doing, which makes the day just pretty awesome, because you have the whole day to do that in any opportunity. And then to just begin to know yourself so deeply that you really know how you want and what you want to express yourself through. It's like you brought up the pebble in the pond thing earlier. And you drop a pebble in a pond, and the entire surface of the pond, there's not a piece of the surface of the pond that is left untouched by dropping that pebble. But the thing we forget is, if the impact of that is going to affect the whole thing, we can take that pebble and just choose where we'd love to put it. And it's going to have a ripple effect on the entire pond. I believe the same is true for our life. If we're able to look deeply within ourselves and find really the core of who we are, not what other people are telling us we should be, then we get to choose where we drop that pebble in. It could be music, could be teaching. We could even distinguish in that. Well, it is music, but what do I really love about it? Oh, it's actually teaching music, or it's actually performing, or it's actually, in a support. I love helping orchestras market music. There's many ways to approach life, but I think that the fundamental part of having a really fulfilled life and achieving excellence in whatever you're doing, having a chance at touching your own greatness, is getting to know yourself on this really deep level, understanding what makes you tick, and being willing to show that to the world in a way that feels really vulnerable sometimes. But it's also the best thing because it's you.
Yeah, it's exciting. The name I love the name that you chose for this, and it's gonna be great to see where this new aspect of what you do takes you.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. It's just I'm sure I'm going to learn lots from it. And like I said in the welcome episode, it's really for learning, all of us to learn from one another, because we each have something to teach. We each have something to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't wait to follow along. I'm curious. I people who start a podcast, I'm always interested in what podcasts are probably a part of your life. You've been listening to. What are some of your go-to shows? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh boy, let me pop open my. Lately I've been listening. I came across this guy on Twitter, and his name is I believe it's pronounced Zahil Bloom. I don't think he has his own podcast, but he's a guest on a bunch of different stuff right now. And he's an investor, which I know nothing about. It's not my world at all. But he approaches it from this kind of this perspective of what I was just talking about. The markets are always going to change. We don't really have a lot of control over it, but we can sort of influence our decisions. So how do we know ourselves to make the best decisions in the moment for the investments we're trying to generate income with, for the people who have invested with us, the people who were, our clients, basically. So I've been loving a lot about what he talks about. The Dave Chang podcast I've been listening to a lot. That's just hilarious. He's a chef, and he talks a lot about process, and like whenever he's opening a new restaurant, he's has these things called the pre-opening diaries, where he's just talking through the process of opening, all the death by thousand cuts things that he needs to go through, all the heartache and all the setbacks, all the things. And he also talks a lot about just well-being. He's had some mental health stuff that he's gone through and understands that he needs to be attentive to. So just him being vulnerable and talking about that stuff and realizing, wow, this really, really incredible person who's achieved a lot, and inside he's been struggling this whole time, and his willingness to open that up. What else do I listen to? Let me open this up again.
You're giving me things to subscribe after we get off the call. I didn't realize David Chang had a podcast. I love
Oh, it's amazing.
And I love following along with. I follow a lot of food related YouTube channels. I love Alex, the French cooking guy.
Oh wow.
He has a podcast that he does just with his a producer, and it's a really fun. It's just totally silly, but it's about food, and he's so passionate about that. And I love that intersection of food, music, creativity, all that. I find really interesting.
Yeah. It's a really fun episode. Like, you could listen to it in a bunch of different ways. Like, if you just want to be entertained and laugh, you can listen to it in that way. If you want to actually like pay attention closely and get some insight from it, same episode, you'll be able to do that. It's a really good one, and it's well done. It's a really funny segment called "My Opinion is Fact." It's always a great time. One of the there's one by, I can't remember his name, but it's called Sean Delaney. It's called "What Got You Here," and that's a really fascinating. It's a little bit kind of it's I hate to say this because it stands on strengths of its own, but he sort of does a deep dive into people, sort of like Tim Ferriss does, where he's dissecting their process and understanding their learning process, their creativity process, and just how they're able to create what they create in the world. I love that one. Of course, the Tim Ferriss podcast is always a great one to listen to. And then like some of the odd stuff I just dabble, like, I don't know, but like some stuff that captures my interest. I love watches. It's like a crazy world. It's like, it's one of those things where it's sort of like wine. You could just go down the street, buy a 20 bottle of wine, and that's fine. That's what I enjoy. Serves a purpose. Or if you're like a crazy wine person, you can end up going to auctions and stuff, and like, that's your whole world, and it's like millions of dollars spent on this stuff. I find the same thing with the watch world, and it's just this really like fascinating, interesting thing of how story is created around an object. It's like there's watches that are like $100,000, right? And it tells time. That's its function. It tells time. It's not going to be any different than a Timex that you get at wherever. But the story that they've created around the thing, I find it so interesting in the way of storytelling and marketing, and just to know what brands are doing in that space. It's kind of, I like it.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. But somebody that I follow on YouTube, he doesn't have I don't think he has a podcast anyway, but Peter McKinnon is really into watches, and so he's some of his watchmakers on there. I find it so interesting what people listen to and how they listen, and like for me, I use this podcast app Overcast, though I think you can do this in many podcast apps. And I have if I hear about a podcast, I subscribe to it. I don't care. I've got it set so it only keeps the first couple episodes. There's no, and then I have a list called favorites, and things come and go from there. But I am generally in that list. So most of my podcasts are not of my favorites, but at least once a week, I just go in and I think like, what's happening in the wider world, and I reconnect with somebody. It's like finding an old friend, and things come off. I listen to every single Tim Ferriss episode. Then I probably went a couple of years barely listened to any, and then I've gotten back into the groove. And that's one of my current favorites, for whatever reason, is called My First Million. It's by the folks that make that run this newsletter, The Hustle, and it's really what I find interesting. And I'm not an investor exactly. I'm not in the startup world exactly, but I find it really interesting the way they approach ideas and creativity. And they're like, the whole thing is, they're like, all right, that's a good idea. What's the next idea you got? Okay, here's what we're going to start. And just this flow of ideas and creativity and looking at trends that are going on and spotting them. And I find that just really creatively stimulating. And then at the end of every episode, they kind of ask for feedback on how do you think this episode went? What could we have done differently? Where do you think the conversation kind of lagged? And they're just talking to each other. And it's kind of interesting. Totally different way than I approach podcasting, but I find that I don't listen to a lot of like current news stuff because it just kind of stresses me out. But I find that one, just because there's just this creative flow that's going on. I find that one really interesting. But I've got those right here on my iPad. I'm gonna look those up after we get done chatting. So
nice. Let me know what you think. I do have a question about how you listen to podcasts. So you're on Overcast and you just set it so that you have this repository of episodes you can check out anytime. And then you also mentioned that a lot of times it's just there with you doing different stuff. Is there any time it's like, how do you capture your ideas that are or ideas or insights, or just what's your process for capturing that stuff when you're listening, or do you?
Oh yeah, no, I love this, and I'm always tweaking my process, but and it's a combination of things, frankly. I use this app called Notion to organize projects in my life. Yeah, and I have on my iPhone and my iPad a shortcut set up that's just called Spark, and that is like my idea pops into my head, it goes right into Spark, and I like that because Notion is where I'm running like some kind of complicated projects. Or it's where, and like just the way that you can, I like the way that app flows. It can be a to-do list, or it can become like an entire thing I'm managing. And most of my ideas, they pop into my head and they don't go anywhere, but I just want to get it somewhere. I used to use Evernote. I've moved away, but I still use Evernote, just not for that. And then sometimes I'll use the reminders app on the phone. And this happens a lot of the time when I'm playing gigs, because I know that like a bunch of stuff's going to come into my head and I'm going to get it out of my head real quick. And so that's where like, oh, dang it, I got to go buy trash bags or something, or something like that. That's usually where or like, oh, I need to reach out to Scott Pingle about this thing to have him send me. It's like stuff that's like right in the moment. And then I really like, you were talking about writing. I like physically I like actually putting pen to paper or screen. In my case, I find that using the Apple Pencil and the iPad Pro is where the ideas really start to come. So I do morning pages a lot of the time, not every day, but I just wake up and write. I find that helpful. And then I find that actually planning my week out and planning projects out, and anytime I'm on a conversation, I always have this thing here and I'm writing. So a lot of idea. And then I have a process for just going through that and kind of harvesting. I put a little star and circle it when it's something that I'm going to want to harvest. So I go back and I harvest the handwritten things, which is where a lot of I just don't always have my iPad with me. So
so wait, when do you, sorry, getting kind of nerdy on this, but
that's okay, I love it.
So when do you mark it to be harvested? Is that right when you're taking a note, or do you have a different process to come back and look over stuff?
Well, this is my and again, this is all subject to change. Yeah. So I'll be 2027. Jason can look back and listen to this and see. But what I do is I just always have this thing open, and sometimes I don't take any notes, and sometimes I take like a ton of notes. But if there's something that I'm going to want to follow up on, I just put a little star and a circle like that, and that's just my little. And so then what I do is once a week, maybe twice a week, I go through it, and I just, in Notability, I just have it in most recent notes, and I just go through it, and I just quickly scan through, and then if that will get converted, if it's something I can do quickly, I'll do it. If it's something that goes into Notion, it'll go into Notion. If it's something to email or like subscribe to a podcast, I just go through and so I don't worry about, because I have a time in my week that's great for doing that. I usually go out on the balcony and sit there and just like pull that out and get it tidy, and then so I'm just capturing things as I go. But that's only when I'm like in front of the computer. When I'm out in the world, that Notion, Spark, or the Notes app. I generally don't do voice memos. I used to do voice memos back in the day. For whatever reason, I've fallen on. I think it's because I used to be battling Siri too much. It wouldn't understand me. And find that it would be so confusing to look back that I couldn't understand it. So, how about you? Because I love people's process. How do you capture things?
Yeah, a lot of times, I haven't quite figured out. There are a couple places where they're sort of like, I don't know about friction points, but like places I'm losing stuff that I want to be capturing. Mm-hmm. So if I'm at home listening to podcasts, no problem. I have I'm a pen and paper guy, but also I use Roam Research for my note taking, and just have set up a place to capture stuff, and it's just really easy for me. A lot of times if I've set out actual time of like study time to listen to a podcast, I'll go through and just, it's easy. Just click the share and then hit the time, mm-hmm. And then I'll glue that into my notes app and just leave a little note. Oh, he's talking about this, or I like this because of whatever. And then I'll have it there. And sometimes like you, if I really find it something important I want to come back to, I just tag it with a tag. I usually have some sort of like small notebook or something. So if I'm out and about, or my phone as well, if I find it super important, I'll just make a paper note of it then and there, and then somehow try to process those later too. But a lot of times the processing of it gets lost on me. Sometimes it's like a month before I come back to stuff, and it's like, oh, well, I don't know. Is this stuff important at all? Well, there's one thing. That's cool. I'll follow up on that. But a lot of this is just interesting in the moment, has no real relevance to anything I'm doing a month later.
Yeah, that's why I've stayed away from the reminders app on the phone, except for like actual grocery lists, frankly, because I find that my to-dos just go there and die. And I've never been a big traditional to-do app fan for whatever reason. That just doesn't see. I'm just someone who I'll get it all down. And so Notion seems to have worked the best for me because you can hide a lot of information really easily. It's like I know that 90% of anything I write down, it's just kind of like the active collection.
Yeah.
My monkey mind just needs something to get things down. But that flow has seemed to work. One thing I've been doing recently, since we're talking about process, is I've realized, Jason, you live on the north waterfront in San Francisco. Why don't you just take advantage whenever possible? So I've been doing these. I have like a shorter, medium, and long walk, but the long walk is like 10 miles round trip. It's basically to Fort Point at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge, then back through the Presidio. And my morning routine these last few weeks has been wake up just before dawn, take the dog, take a cup of coffee, take my iPad, go for that walk, come back, stop in the Presidio, and kind of start my day in the Presidio. So it's like a movie version of starting your day. I'm like looking at the Golden Gate Bridge. And I don't obligate myself, but I find that I just work differently. State change has always been really important to me, and that's been particularly stressful for me the last 20 months or whatever. 20,
yeah.
I'm not someone who likes to sit at home, and I've spent too much time with this exact view you've seen.
Right.
So I have found that to be, and things, I think about things differently when I'm at different places,
Yeah.
And so though I'm probably fastest or most efficient for what that's worth, like in this current setup you see right here, I definitely think differently when I'm just writing. I think differently when I'm out in nature. And so I just try to make sure if things feel a little bit off, one thing I do is I try to track what I do during the day. I've been doing that since I was a teenager, and in part it's so that every once in a while I can go back and look at like how have things been going, Jason. And I sort of look and it's like, where did I feel like things were in a really good flow and what was I doing? And one thing I have tried, and I'm sure we talked about this back in 2015, 2016 too, but like one of the things I have noticed is like when I'm spending a lot of time in nature and when I'm getting a lot of exercise, that's when the good stuff happens. And when I'm cooped up by myself and I'm trying so I'm trying to yeah, that's an extremely long way of saying I'm working on.
Yeah. I love what you just brought up about writing. I writing. I think it's an important thing to do if you want to understand your own thinking. Um, you start writing about something. If someone asks you to explain something, you quickly get to see the holes and where you need to do research and understand something better. And when you write about your own process, you get to see the thing too. So it's just like, oh, I'm having this problem, like with this technical challenge in bass. What's going on here? Just writing about it can, a lot of times you get to, it's sort of like, it's like doing a math problem. It might be possible to do like 563 times 373. You could probably do that in your head. It's going to take you some time. But like holding an answer, so holding part of the solution and trying to work on the next part of the solution, that's really hard to do. And I found when just writing, it makes it possible so that I can hold part of the solution down and it's actually captured so I can work on the next thing, but then also come back and like, oh, that's what I was thinking. I've got it all right there. So I've found just, even if it's not to share with people, I mean, sharing your writing, publishing your writing in some way, improves your thinking so much. And I just find it a valuable practice for anyone to take that on. And then, just being outdoors. There's this interesting book by Barbara Tversky, I believe her name is. And she was Daniel Kahneman's wife. So Daniel Kahneman wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, this beautiful book about first and second level thinking. And part of her work is around how we orient to space. And I guess there are these, I can't remember what they're called. Maybe they're called grid cells. Don't quote me on that. But when we're outside, we have these parts in our system. I'm like, this is completely unscientific terminology. And I'm just going to try and get through it as easily as I can so everyone can understand. But there's this system in our brain and our body that's trying to orient to space. So this is the thing, if like basketball players, they can feel their teammate over here without looking and they're able to pass to them. Or like when they're throwing a ball, they can feel where the boundaries are, the out of bounds. So we're always orienting in space and time. And when we're outside, that orientation system is taking more input and trying to learn more about where we are. And it's like, it gives the brain a larger perspective to work with. And I think it makes, I read that and I was like, oh, no wonder we have so many different ideas and things that percolate when we're out in a big space, or when our when we have some space and time actually, but largely like when we're in open space, we generate ideas a lot easier. And I think it's a lot because of this system in our body that's like gives us a wider perspective and is like thinking about the bigger space we're in and trying to solve problems in that bigger space. Yeah. So it's a pretty cool book to check out.
I'll check it out. I remember when we did the podcast back up on Mount Sutro, you were talking about this moment when you were driving on the one and you just started to things started to come into focus on what you want,
Right. Yeah.
I've thought about that, what you were talking about many times over the years. And I've learned and I've read or listened to or whatever, but things that seem to be good for a lot of people. It's like getting outside, getting sunshine, seeing the water, and seeing like some relief in the landscape, like a view. And those are all things that I get on that north waterfront walk.
Yeah.
Not today because it's raining, but most days, it's like, wow. And then throw exercise into that, taking the dog out. So you got this smiling little guy with you. And it's like, all right, that's the best possible use of my time, and it's benefiting me in so many different ways, and it really does. And sometimes, I don't know how you are with these sort of things, but I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm out, but I also take that time to figure things out sometimes. So a lot of the time I'll walk for an hour, and then I'll just shut everything off and think and maybe I don't think about anything. but maybe I do. And maybe ideas pop into my mind, or maybe I don't. I don't care. It's just going to happen. And then I'll go sit down. There's this really nice area of the Presidio, and just sit and maybe check my email. And then I'm like, I'm checking my email while I'm looking at the Golden Gate Bridge. I have this kind of moment. But yeah, it's just really interesting. And thinking about different ways of idea collection, no matter what you do. And, I think a little bit differently when I'm writing. I think a little bit differently when I'm using Notion and I'm looking at a board, and I try to like harness. It's like practicing. Practice. So you'll put on the metronome. You'll work on it. You'll put the metronome on offbeats. You'll record yourself and listen back. You'll play every other note. You can approach so many things in your life that way, and that's maybe part of why. It's just interesting to me, people that were professional musicians or got to a high level in music and then have gone into other areas of life. I just find it so interesting how well they tend to do so many times at like what you're doing. My wife is a doctor at UCSF. She's has a master's
harp player.
So, or people at the San Francisco Symphony, and that was something I was also noticing during the pandemic. All these professional musicians, these elite level, Olympians in many ways. What happens when they don't have a job for a while and they turn their attention to other ideas? It was really interesting to see what, a lot of people are trying to start up something and just kind of like make it work. But it was interesting to see what do these people that have gotten to such a high level and haven't really had to think about a whole bunch of other things, professionally at least. What do they do? And so I was having, I don't know if fun's the right word, but it was interesting being a fly on the wall, watching what my fellow colleagues in the music world.
Certainly a creative, fertile time. I wish it's a terrible time, and there's in terms of creativity, super fertile time. I mean, I think in terms of the arts, we'll be seeing a lot of incredible things coming out, being created for years to come that have its seeds in the past 18, 20 months. But I think it's sometimes, get me wrong. I mean, I love musicians, but sometimes I think the talent, sometimes I'm like, everything that musicians, sometimes it's too bad it's squandered on music. But I do think just our training, right? Like we have to master deliberate practice. We have to understand how to problem solve. We have to understand how to work with people. There's also this thing of I'm sure you felt it before. You're going through rehearsal and you have some sort of sense. You develop this sense. You might not be able to articulate it, but you're going through rehearsal and it's like, something's off. We're going to have to stop in 3 beats or a measure or 2 beats or something. So there's this ability to perceive when something is going to go wrong, and then being able to understand it and quickly create a result that solves for that challenge or that thing that made the result wrong. All of these things are incredible skills that you can, if you understand that you have these as a musician and can begin to leverage them in other areas, there's really nothing stopping you from anything you want to do. I mean, there's just so much available. And, I just think there's so much potential for all kinds of things to happen when for any musician who has a skill set of being involved in training for orchestral auditions and orchestral performance or a solo career, whatever, ensemble playing. So I think that's one of the big things is just the mastery of deliberate practice, understanding how to break down a problem and solve for it.
You bet. I couldn't agree more. Well, Allan, we got to have you on more than once every 6 episodes. And I hope that half-life thing that you were mentioning is true. And we're gonna from 10 years to 5 to 2. So let me know the next time you're in town.
I will, man.
Obviously, I'd love to have The door is always open, my friend, for this
man.
show. But I'll send people. Obviously, the podcast is out. I am subscribed. I'll send people there. Where else do you want me to send people?
Easiest place is probably just social media, Facebook or Instagram, and then if you want a deeper relationship, I guess, I also have a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. I write a newsletter as well.
I'm on that.
Sweet. You can subscribe to just about insights and ways to change perspective. So if that interests you, you can find that in my bio at Facebook, and just drop me a line if you want. Love connecting with people, love talking to people, and it'd be great to create more connections here. And Jason, thanks so much, man. It's just great to see you. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's like such an interesting thing to reflect back on my journey and your journey and our journey together. It's really awesome to be here.